to Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting-edge conversations while exploring the quantum possibilities. I'm your co-host, Nori Love, along with my co-host, Aage Nost, and Tom Schaefer. And I just want to take a moment to invite you to connect with us. You can connect with us at broadcastteamalpha.com. You can connect with us on Facebook at Broadcast Team Alpha, and you could join our YouTube page.
Start over. There we go. Much better. Sorry, go ahead, Nori.
Start from the beginning.
Start from the beginning. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Welcome, everybody, to 2019 Broadcast Team Alpha, where we bring you cutting-edge conversations while exploring the quantum possibilities. I'm your co-host, Nori Love, along with my co-host, Aage Nost, and Tom Schaefer. And I would just like to take a moment to invite you to join our YouTube page, broadcastteamalpha.com. You can go there and click on the link to subscribe. And we have a fascinating guest today. We're kicking off 2019 in a phenomenal way. We have Russell TARG, who is a laser physicist. Aage, do you want to tell us about Russell?
Yes. Yeah, this is exciting. Russell TARG is a physicist and a parapsychologist, and one of the initial people that put together the remote viewing program for the CIA. And there goes the phone. And that ran for 20 years with the CIA. And they did a lot of experimentation and proved a lot of the things that many of us is only theorizing about. And he is also an author of several books and a lecturer, and that's specifically on remote viewing and psychic abilities. And he's talking about what makes it all possible, the non-locality, and that everything is connected in the universe, in this self-aware universe where we are living. He's also a producer of a documentary that is coming out, I think it is in February, he said, of 2019. It's called Third Eye Spies. And boy, would that be interesting, because there we get a peek behind the curtain. And without any more ado, I want to introduce Russell TARG. Welcome to the show, Russell.
Happy New Year. I'm happy to be with you, Aage.
Oh, this is going to be so much fun. Now, you have done experiments and research and done what many of us are only theorizing about. How did it all start out for you? How did you get on this path?
Well, as you probably catch on, my vision is very poor. So when I was a child, I was sensitive to all kinds of images that would come my way. And I was an enthusiastic card player. And I had the idea that I sometimes knew what the cards were going to be before I turned them up. Now, I'm not telling you that I'm a great psychic, or I'm not here to talk about my psychic prowess, but as a kid, you're very interested in how you can win at cards. And I got interested in psychic stuff through my really childhood card playing. And I got interested in magic. I lived in New York City, where you could go to the magic stores and talk to magicians and buy tricks. So by the time I was a teenager, I was on stage doing pretend mind reading. And what that means is that I would pull a piece of paper out of a jam jar, hold it to my forehead, and say, "There's a lady in the audience and she's lost her dog." And someone would stand up and say, yes, I've lost my dog. And of course, I could do that because I had already read the card from the previous one that I looked at. So I was always one ahead. So I knew for a fact that somebody in the audience had been looking for her dog. But while I'm standing there with the lights in my eyes, I would occasionally get impressions of what the woman's house looked like, how you would go upstairs, how you could see the patchwork quilt on her bed, and I could share all that, and people got extremely excited about that because I was able to fold in a smaller part, I could fold in a small amount of genuine psychic functioning with what was basically a fake magic trick.
Mm.
Amazing.
By the time I got into high school, I realized that people were really investigating that there was a Society for Psychical Research. So I got rid of my pretend magic and began to read the reports of people who were doing ESP research. And I built a ESP teaching machine not too long after that. This is a 4-choice gadget, which you can, well, I can show that to you. We're right here on live television.
So Russell, I actually downloaded that app.
Okay.
The ESP Trainer, yes.
So here it is, the 4-choice game, available free from the Apple Store. And
ESP Trainer.
ESP Trainer. And when you get the right answer, it rings a bell.
So you're getting the right answer. Interesting.
That's right.
I used it last night for a long time, and I wasn't that good. It said that I have some potential.
ESP ability present.
Yes.
If you get all the way up to normal, then ESP ability is present. But people are writing to me lately and saying, I'm getting 12. What does that mean?
Wow.
And 12 with a very high score. So there seems to be, at the end of the year, a lot of people are getting to be very psychic. But the ESP Trainer is a free app at the iStore for your Apple iPhone. It's not for any of the other gadgets. Since I'm giving it away free, I wanted to pay only one time to have the code written for something.
I see. So we were talking before the show, but talking about this app has stimulated this question. When I'm using the app and I'm trying to feel into, right, I'm trying to tap into my consciousness to know which color the picture is behind. It's almost like I'm trying to learn the communication that I have with myself. So is it that I have a sense that the color is brighter, or I just know it, or I feel it? And, it's like I haven't worked that out with myself yet. So it's almost like the signal is like a little bit fuzzy for me. How did you work with people regarding what was the word that you used? Moving the mental noise out of the way.
It'll be different for different people. As a teaching machine, the purpose of this gadget to give you feedback. Every time you press the button, it'll show you the correct answer. And what you want to do is learn what it feels like at the time you're making the correct choice. So you can learn whether the button feels brighter or feels fuzzy or comes to you from the future. Different people have different impressions. And because it goes on and on, you don't get a score and you don't get a grade. The whole purpose is to learn what it feels like when you are getting the correct answer. And one of the buttons, which you may have noticed, is called a pass button.
Yes.
So that when you don't have that special feeling, you can then pass. So you can say it's red, and then if it's red, you then go pass, 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 until you have that strong feeling again, and then you choose yellow.
Okay.
And it's a teaching machine in that you learn what it feels like. You have to separate the memory and imagination from the psychic signal. So an engineer would say it's a signal to noise problem. You've got all kinds of noise from your presuppositions, and you want to learn what it feels like when you're being psychic. And that's what it's like when I'm teaching people to do remote viewing in the laboratory.
Very interesting, because we're using the word psychic which to me sounds very heady, very intellectual, very brain, very consciousness. And then you're talking about feeling. How much does feeling have to do with it?
Well, with psychic abilities or remote viewing, you learn what it feels like when you're tuned into the target. For example, I spent 10 years sitting in the dark helping people do remote viewing.
Wow.
So I was the psychic travel agent. And the way it would be is that I would be sitting with you and Aage had gone to hide somewhere. And I would say, we don't know where in the world Aage could be, but if you'll tell me what images come to you that are surprising, I would say, tell me about your surprising images. And if you said, well, it looks to me like he's gone to Macy's, I would say, from my experience, that doesn't sound like remote viewing. That sounds like a guess. Let's start over and tell me what you're experiencing, what surprising images show up, and don't try and name it.
Mm.
So even though I don't know the answer, I can be a very helpful interviewer as we separate the psychic signal from the mental noise.
That's amazing. And I've watched many of your videos over the past 2 days where you worked with that lovely woman. I don't remember her name.
Hella Hammett.
Yes. And she would sketch out some things that didn't really look like anything, but later it proved to be a place, across the world or whatever.
That's right. We were asked to describe Brezhnev's office in the Kremlin.
Yes.
And she described going down a hall covered with red. And she saw a door covered with red leather held in place by upholstery tacks. And I said, okay, I'll open that door for you. And she said, well, it's dark inside because 8 hours in advance. I said, okay, I'll turn on the lights, as though I'm leading her through a lucid dream.
Yes.
And then she could say, well, I look out the window and it looks like the Kremlin. And on the other side, a very big wooden desk covered with glass. And behind the desk is a door. And I said, well, let's open the door and see where it leads. And it led to some kind of computer room, we thought.
Wow.
And I began to feel very nervous.
Yeah.
This is kind of a joint out-of-body experience. And I said, I think we've gone far enough, Hella. I have a lot of clearances, but I don't have a clearance to be in the Kremlin computer room.
Wow. Well, that was very ethical of you.
I thought we had done enough.
Wow, that's amazing.
In the film, in Third Eye Spies, yes, we have what makes the film unique is that we have the 2 CIA contract monitors who oversaw our program for a decade, and they were polygraphed and interrogated and are high-level CIA people on camera now, looking into the camera and saying, yes, I was there, and what TARG said really happened was true. They did find the submarine. They did find the American hostages. So we did things for publication to be published in scientific journals, but what paid the rent is finding a downed Russian airplane or an American hostage or a Russian sub or a weapons factory in Siberia. So we really were working with the CIA, doing remote viewing. We were the psychic spies. I was not a remote viewer, of course, but I was just a helpful person. You could say that the CIA paid for my spiritual development. CIA paid me to sit in the dark for 10 years.
Wow.
Learning what remote viewing sounds like.
Wow, that's so fascinating. We just want to send a shout out to all of the people in our chat room, all of our regulars. Thank you for being here, Halidium Labs. And there's a quick question for you, Russ. Have you ever met Ed Dames?
Yes, I've met Ed Dames.
Okay, that was one of our chat room people asked that. I'm not sure.
There's a lot of criticism of Ed Dames, which I share, because he has a lot of forecasts that were all wrong. But I don't have any argument with him teaching remote viewing, because remote viewing is very easy to teach. It's a natural ability, and you give people permission to use this ability that they have, and I'm sure that he could do that as well as lots of other people. What I have in mind, you see, I wrote this book recently, Reality of ESP.
Yes.
But my idea is you don't have to pay thousands of dollars for a weekend to develop your psychic ability. You can work with a friend and help each other separate the psychic signal from the mental noise. And I explain how to do that and why you should believe it. So this book's been very successful. People write to me and say that really works. It's not so hard. I just sat down with my girlfriend and she could describe what I brought in the bag. I didn't know that was so easy. So my job, people ask me, well, how do you teach remote viewing? And I said, my job is to give people permission to use an ability they already have.
Interesting. So people might think that they're just imagining things if they don't know what they're doing initially, or
that's right. When I'm working with somebody and I feel that they're just guessing, could it be Macy's? Could it be the beach? Could it be the mountains? I would say, well, it could be anything, but I want you to describe, just tell me something that you know nobody else knows. You can't do this wrong. If you just tell me the surprising images that show up in your consciousness, that's what we want to know. Don't worry about what it is. Tell me the shapes and the forms and the colors and how you feel about that. And at the end, we'll figure it out. It's like the Oracle of Delphi. When I visited Delphi many years ago and talked to the people, the guides, and Delphi worked very much like remote viewing. You had a priestess who was somewhat intoxicated with the local herbs, and the priest would ask her a question, and the woman of the psychic, of course, wouldn't know the answer. She would just say what came to her psychically, and then the priest, together with the psychic, had to figure out what that could possibly mean. So it's very much like my interviewing somebody, and they give me a long dissertation about this and that, and nobody knows what it is. And then I have to figure out what parts of that could be true, what parts sound like guessing, what parts sound like remote viewing, and then I give that to the contract monitor. So it's very much like the problems they had at Delphi, where the Oracle didn't just tell you straight out, you're going to go to Persia and lose. You're going to go to war with Persia and lose. The priest has to figure out what that all means. And in that particular instance, they guessed wrong. That is, Croesus wanted to know what's going to happen the next year. He said the Oracle said there's going to be a terrible war. Thousands and thousands of people will die, and a great kingdom will be lost. So Croesus was head of a big city state, and he said, I mean, the war will come and I'll win. But a war did come and he didn't win. The Persians won.
Wow.
But Croesus had already tested that oracle. It's another long story that I tell, where the oracle was able to tell from 100 miles away very accurately what Croesus was doing in his courtyard. So he knew that Oracle of Delphi was really on the money, and she could be able to give very accurate descriptions.
We got another thought here that I've been, we hear and we see the effects of the remote viewing coming out in form of images and thoughts and impressions and feelings. But where does that come from? Does it come from our brain? Is it created somehow with a connection through electromagnetics with other brains? Or is it coming from the non-local mind that is giving its impression into the pictures that we get?
Well, as an honest physicist with years of experience doing this, I can tell you safely, we don't know where it comes from.
Amazing.
From 2,500 years ago, psychic abilities were well known. In the Buddhist literature and the Prajnaparamita, they say again and again there is no separation in consciousness. Separation is an illusion. And the Buddhist said that. The Taoist said in the Tao Te Ching, there is no separation. This little pin that I have shows that the male and female, the red and the blue, the good and the bad, all have connectivity with one another. So the I Ching was the earliest expression of non-duality, non-dual thought. And in physics today, there was a big problem in the 1930s where Niels Bohr realized that light was both a wave and a particle. And the physics student wants to know, well, when the light goes through my light meter, it goes tick, tick, tick. When it goes through the prism, it spreads out like a rainbow. So I want to know, I'm a physics student, is it a wave or is it a particle? And Niels Bohr said it's described by complementarity. That is, it's both a wave and not a wave, both a particle and not a particle. And the first person to say that was a great Buddhist logician at the time of Christ named Nagarjuna. He was called the second Buddha, and he explained a lot. The Buddhist writing is often not so easy to understand. Buddha said things like, this is neither a teaching nor not a teaching, at which point you're ready to put down the Diamond Sutra and say this is too hard. But Nagarjuna said, most things are neither true nor not true. He said a lot of suffering is due to Aristotle. See, Aristotle said there is no middle. He taught the philosophy of the excluded middle. The thing is white or it's not white. It's black or it's not black, and there's no gray. This is all a long way of saying what you said is true, that there is no separation, and the idea of non-duality is very hot today in modern physics, whereas Niels Bohr, a great Nobel Prize winner who understood nuclear physics, talked about complementarity. In Schrodinger, who solved quantum mechanics and made it useful, talks about how things can't be separated one from another. Schrodinger's famous cat is both alive and not alive. And of course, people hate that.
Yes.
But it's the Buddhist idea that whenever you make a distinction, you probably make an error. So we think that the long answer to your question is the reason that you can tell what I'm thinking about or looking at is because in consciousness, there's no separation. I don't have to send a message by mental telepathy or mental radio to you because the image you want is already in your head. So the most interesting thing I know, the most important thing I know about psychic abilities is that it's a non-local ability. It's another hot topic in current physics. By non-local, I mean that it's no harder for our psychics in the laboratory in California, no harder to describe what's happening in Soviet Siberia than it is to describe what's happening across the street. Increasing the distance absolutely does not degrade the signal. No question about it from a decade of work. And the other thing that's even more interesting is it is no harder to describe what you're doing right now than it is to describe what you're going to be doing 2 hours from now when you leave the studio or next week. So it's no harder to describe contemporaneous activities than it is to look days or weeks into the future. We don't know beyond weeks. You see, if it goes months or years, then you've forgotten what it's all about. But the most common psychic experience that people have is a precognitive dream, where you go to sleep on New Year's Eve and you have this crazy dream about people driving a good humor truck down the street on New Year's Day, most unlikely event. And you wake up New Year's Day and somebody is driving a wagon covered with bells. that reminds you of your childhood good humor truck.
Yeah.
So we would say that New Year's Day, the good humor truck on New Year's Day is what caused you to have a dream of a good new humor truck the following day, the previous day. That is, Tuesday's experience for the cause of Monday's dream.
So it's what you're saying sounds like we're taking time and space out of factoring this. Is that
That's
true?
Is physics, much in physics today is non-local. That means it's independent of space and time. That is when it's another thing that Schrodinger discovered in the 1930s. In certain cases where photons are born together, identical twin photons, they go off in opposite directions. And if you grab the one on the left, you affect the one on the right, no matter how far apart they are.
So this is what Einstein referred to as spooky action at a distance.
That's right. Einstein hated that idea. He thought that it violated relativity. And it does violate relativity, but if you had to send a signal from Nebraska to New York, that would violate relativity because that would be going instantaneously over 2,000 miles, but there's actually no separation between them. You're not having to send the signal between them. They're already connected to them.
So that instantaneous action is probably caused then by the fact that outside of the physical, in the higher vibrations where this kind of actions happen, there is no distance. There's all it at the same time and moment, right?
That's right. There's no separation.
Yeah.
And what's important to know for your listeners is this is not a new age idea. This is written out in detail again and again, starting with the yin yang. The yin yang is an expression of no separation, expression of non-duality, and that's a symbol from 2,500 years ago, celebrating no separation.
So Russ, this might be philosophical, and then you don't have to answer this, but how did we get so separated? I mean, was there a point in time in history where we were more, living from not such a huge place of separation? I mean, I look back into my childhood and growing up, and a lot of the people, places, things, schools that I went to kind of, reinforce the separation.
Both science and religion don't like people who have psychic abilities.
Yeah.
In religion, the priest in the organized religion looks out and sees these people are meditating and having psychic experiences and are having direct experiences of the divine even. And churches are worried about what I call freelance spirituality. If people are experiencing the divine, connecting with one another, having psychic experiences, even at the CIA, one of the things that caused problems for us is that there were some fundamentalists, sizable number of fundamentalists, saying, how do you know that these people are not in league with the Antichrist movement? So I'm a laser physicist. I have nothing to do with the Antichrist movement.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
a Buddhist. I'm not involved with that. That's somebody else's problem. But,
Fascinating.
But the fundamentalists felt that this is from the devil, even in the end of the 20th century. And science is also worried, starting with the so-called Enlightenment in the 1600s. Science was beginning to have some great success, and they were pulling away from the alchemists and the mystics. So people who were doing things, trying to turn gold from lead and doing other things that don't work, they got a bad reputation from the serious scientists. So there was an early schism between the alchemists and the real chemists.
Wow.
And science is always worried about mystic stuff where people are pretending to do science.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've overcome that. Our success came from a number of reasons. First of all, my partner and I are both laser physicists, and we were pretty well known as scientists by the time we opened an ESP laboratory at Stanford. And we were able to go to the CIA and to NASA and say, we've done tough things for you in the past, in the 1960s, 1970s. You remember, we built stuff for you. We now have an idea for how to teach people to get in touch with their psychic abilities. I told NASA that we could help astronauts get in touch with a spacecraft, and that would be desirable.
Wow.
And I had my little ESP teaching machine with me at a conference on speculative technology in off the coast, an island off the coast of Georgia. And Werner von Braun was there, St. Simon's Island. And Werner von Braun did very, very well with my ESP teaching machine, this 4-choice gadget. And he proposed to the administrator of NASA that they ought to give us some money. So
Wow.
my connection with von Braun, his psychic hit that day. And similarly with NASA, with CIA, the two physicists got dough from the intelligence agency to teach people how to be psychic. And psychologists at that time were having a very hard time getting money from the universities. The universities are as afraid of ESP as any other scientific organization. Everybody is afraid of their reputation, but the CIA said, gee, if a guy could close his eyes and describe where the hostage is hidden, that could be very useful. Why don't we see if these guys can do it?
Mm-hmm.
Very inexpensive program. You don't have to buy any hardware. You just sit in the dark with somebody and talk to them and say, we could afford that. And we did that for 20 years.
Wow.
Say, Russell, did not the Russians also investigate this for their space program?
The Russians did investigate it for the space program. We talked to a Soviet astronaut, a cosmonaut, and they were very interested in contacting their spacecraft. That's something they were doing. But before that, Ostrander and Schroeder wrote a book called Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain that came out in 1970. And that book was very helpful to us.
Yeah, I have the book.
CIA had that book and had several monographs that they had published, and we show those in our film, in Third Eye Spies. In fact, all through the movie, all through Third Eye Spies, we're going back and forth between what we did and what the Russians were doing. And the Russians were very helpful to us in scaring the CIA that they should keep supporting us. We were doing good work for them also. And in fact, when they were doubting precognition, I did a formal experiment where we tried to forecast changes in the silver commodity market. So each week for 9 weeks, we would try and forecast where the silver would go up a little, up a lot, down a little, down a lot, and then we would, working with an investor and a broker that I was not in contact with, they would buy or sell silver based on what the psychic told me. And we were correct 9 times in a row in the silver market, made $120,000
Wow.
in the 1980s when that was a lot of money.
Wow.
Oh.
That's great.
And doing anything in life 9 times in a row is significant.
Absolutely.
Hey, that's something for the listeners to think about. Learning remote viewing could really help their portfolio, couldn't it?
Well, there's a caution that does not always work. And the following year, we got very excited with how much money we were going to make, and we're not so successful the following year. But there are now many people, and you can look on the internet, there are many people interested in using psychic ability to forecast the market, and some of them claim to be doing very well. I thought that was too hard for me, so I thought I'd make a film instead.
Yeah.
When is the film Third Eye Psychic Spies coming out?
The film is called Third Eye Spies.
Sorry.
It'll come out in February, and you can see the very engaging coming attraction right now. If you go to thirdeyespies.com, if you have 90 seconds available, you can see this remarkable coming attraction that shows you what we were up to spying with the CIA.
We've got the domain on the broadcast right now, so people can see the domain to go to thirdeyespies.com.
Excellent,
So.
excellent.
We had another question for you, Russell.
After you see the coming attraction, you can buy my book, The Reality of ESP, and learn how to do it yourself. My subtitle of this is A Physicist's Proof of Psychic Abilities. So after 20 years, I'm no longer agnostic. I'm confident that psychic abilities are real, and that I was willing to bet my career. I was a well-known laser pioneer in the development of the laser. I was involved with lasers before there were any lasers. So I'd been working with lasers 15 years before I started an ESP program, because I felt that in a certain sense, lasers were too easy, that I understood lasers. I wanted to do something that would be more of a reach, more exciting. Mm-hmm. And then in 1972, with my colleague, who was a laser researcher also, we went to SRI, and we had support from Werner von Braun and from other higher, and Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, was very supportive of our work. So SRI said, we'll let you do that, just keep a low profile. And of course, after a few years, we brought in 1% of SRI's money and 99% of their publicity.
Oops.
Oh, yeah.
Very hard to keep a low profile, even though it was a secret program.
Yeah, interesting.
Hey, Tom, you said you had a question from somebody in the chat room?
Yes, we have a question. In fact, we talked about this right before we went live, and I knew it was coming. And that's the question about Montauk. And it's one of our associates, a guy named Thunder. And he was asking about Montauk, the involvement you might have. And something else he mentioned was integratron, if that word means anything to you. But he was curious about any involvement you had in
no, the only spooky involvement we had was talking to Sid Gottlieb, who was the father of MK Ultra. Now, Gottlieb was quite an amiable, sort of old Jewish student, like my old Uncle Sid, sitting down in his basement, surrounded by his books, smoking his pipe. He was a very amiable, smart guy, except he had no ethics at all. He was giving people LSD, and a lot of them died as a result of that. He was very amiable to talk to, but he was a terrible guy. It was like our own Joseph Mengele. Mengele, of course, killed lots of people in the concentration camps. Gottlieb, of course, was Jewish, so he was an equal opportunity misanthrope. He damaged lots of people. And we explained to him that no, we did not want to give our psychics LSD because that would interfere with their cognitive abilities. In order to do high quality psychic functioning, you've got to have all your brains intact, able to discern the difference between your memory and imagination and separate that from the psychic signal. And people can learn to do that.
And I'm glad you're mentioning this, because before, when you were talking about the Oracle of Delphi and being intoxicated on the local herbs, I just wanted to ask you to clarify your ability to be psychic or to do remote viewing, and how important it is or isn't to be clear-headed, to not be intoxicated or otherwise.
You definitely don't want to be intoxicated.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And you know, marijuana gives you lots of nice pictures. There's lots of people, certainly in the 60s, people felt sure that marijuana would make them psychic. And it's the opposite of that. It's very disappointing. You can have a wonderful marijuana experience full of great pictures, but they're of your own generation. That is, the images you see with marijuana are self-generated. They don't come from outside. And that's an interesting thing related. We had the idea that if you could get somebody who had a photographic memory, a perfect memory, then they would be able to do remote viewing because they could then separate the true pictures from their imagination. And the woman we found who had a perfect photographic memory, that she was astonishing and she gave you all the details of a group of pictures we showed to her. And she was a librarian, which is a very good job for her. And she was the only person who could not do remote viewing at all. And that's because the images she saw, the sort of diaphanous, weak images in her mind, were much weaker than her brain that was just full of all the other pictures she saw on the way to the laboratory and parking her car and walking through the offices. So a perfect memory full of images is the opposite of what you want to do remote viewing.
So as you talk about this, I'm wondering, are there qualities or experiences that makes a person more predisposed to being good at that?
Well, intelligence is desirable in remote viewing as it is with everything else.
Yes.
And self-confidence, so that in general, people who are successful at some other thing tend to walk in and be pretty successful at remote viewing. If they're not, the guy says, well, I'm already the president of Bank of America. It's not going to matter if I can see your picture or not. Just you show me evidence here that people can do that. Just tell me what to do. As a businessman, I am, and of course I'm just making this up. As a businessman, I'm used to making decisions where I have incomplete evidence, incomplete information. So any high-level successful person in business got to be that high-level person because he's a good guesser. It just comes to me, Abraham Maslow was a great psychologist in the 70s, and he said that he didn't call it good guessing, but he said people who are able to make decisions in the absence of evidence are psychologically very strong.
Interesting.
And it's very, very desirable to there's some term in psychology for being a good guesser in the absence of information.
I got a question I've been kind of sitting on my tongue here and wanting to fall out, and that is, you know, you've done all these experiments and we all have our own impression of things, but what is the difference between the brain and the mind?
Well, the brain is in the head. We can open up the head and sure enough there's the brain there. But the mind seems to be non-local in its aspect. That is, your mind is able to travel through the universe. We did remote viewing. We once had a program with NASA, and they said, we're sending a Pioneer spacecraft off to Jupiter. And Ingo Swann, the great psychic, Ingo is the one who named remote viewing. He taught us. He's a great American artist and psychic. And Ingo taught us how to do remote viewing. And he said, Ingo, we're going off to Jupiter with the Pioneer spacecraft. Are we going to see anything interesting there? Ingo sat back and took a puff of his cigar and said, well, I see icy rings around Jupiter. Jupiter has these crystal clear rings all the way around. And the NASA guy said, you're thinking of Saturn. And Ingo was big into astrology and said, absolutely, I'm well aware of what Saturn is, sir. this is not Saturn, this is Jupiter, and just has a very few crystal clear rings of ice around it. You'll see when you get there. And a couple of years later, when Pioneer traveled the 500 million miles to Jupiter, their drawings and photographs show rings around Jupiter, just as Ingo drew. And in my book, In Reality of ESP, I show Ingo's original drawing of rings around Jupiter together with NASA's photograph. So that gives us the idea that hundreds of millions of miles don't interfere with Ingo closing his mind and describing what's there. So the Buddhas had it right. The separation is an illusion for consciousness. That is, everything is at hand.